Have you ever noticed how some losses don't hurt right away? How a man can walk away from real love and feel fine until one quiet moment changes everything? This isn't the kind of heartbreak that comes with tears or dramatic endings. It's slower, deeper, more unsettling. When a man loses a woman who truly loved him, the reaction isn't panic, it's silence. He tells himself he's free, he keeps moving. But somewhere between late nights and ordinary mornings, the absence begins to speak. The love he once took for granted starts showing up in unexpected places, in moments where he needs understanding, patience, or someone who saw him completely. That's when realization hits, not loud, not sudden, just heavy. This is the story of what happens after she's gone, when pride fades, distractions stop working, and the truth finally reaches him. When a man loses a woman who truly loved him, the first and most misunderstood reaction is not pain, but emotional numbness mixed with quiet relief. This happens because genuine love often provides structure, emotional grounding, and unseen support. And when it disappears, the mind initially focuses on the absence of responsibility rather than the absence of love. He feels lighter because no one is asking questions, no one is waiting for emotional availability, and no one is holding up a mirror to his inner world. This relief is not happiness, but psychological defense. His mind protects him from immediate pain by reframing the loss as freedom. He convinces himself that things were limiting, demanding, or overwhelming even if they weren't, because accepting the depth of what he lost too early would be too destabilizing. During this stage, he often appears emotionally unaffected. He continues his routine, engages socially, and may even seem more active or distracted than before. This behavior is not a sign that the love didn't matter. It is a sign that it mattered deeply enough to require avoidance. Real love challenges identity, and when it leaves, the mind delays grief to preserve a sense of control. He avoids stillness because stillness invites awareness. As long as he is busy, entertained, or validated externally, he doesn't have to confront what her presence actually contributed to his emotional life. Another key part of this reaction is delayed awareness. He does not immediately recognize what has been lost because much of her love operated quietly. She may have offered emotional regulation, patience, understanding, and consistency without demanding recognition. These elements don't announce their absence right away. They are felt only when life becomes difficult again. At first, he believes he can replace the connection easily, mistaking attention or novelty for emotional depth. But surface-level interactions lack the safety and acceptance he once experienced, and this contrast slowly creates internal discomfort. Pride also plays a powerful role in this initial reaction. Reaching out would require admitting loss, vulnerability, and possibly regret, so he stays silent, telling himself that time will fix everything. He may even rationalize the separation by focusing on minor conflicts or imperfections, minimizing her value to avoid emotional accountability. This cognitive distancing helps him function, but it also delays healing. As days pass, the relief begins to thin. Small moments start to feel hollow. He notices the absence in subtle ways, such as not having someone who understands his moods without explanation, or someone who stays present when he withdraws. These realizations come gradually, not dramatically. By the time he becomes aware that what he lost was rare and irreplaceable, the emotional imprint has already formed. The first reaction was never indifference, it was the mind buying time before truth could safely surface. After the initial numbness fades, the second reaction begins quietly, often without him realizing what is happening. This is the stage where absence turns into presence inside his mind. Her influence starts showing up in everyday situations, not as memories he chooses to revisit, but as emotional echoes he cannot control. He hears her perspective in moments of decision, notices her absence when something good or bad happens, and feels an unfamiliar emptiness during times that once felt neutral. This phase is unsettling because it contradicts the story he told himself at the beginning. He thought moving on would bring clarity, yet now his thoughts feel heavier and less organized. At this point, comparison becomes unavoidable. Every interaction he has is unconsciously measured against the emotional safety she provided. Other connections may feel exciting at first, but they lack depth. Conversations feel shallow, understanding feels conditional, and patience feels transactional. He begins to realize that what he lost wasn't just a relationship, but a space where he was accepted without performance. This realization doesn't come with dramatic sadness, it comes with quiet dissatisfaction. Nothing feels wrong on the surface, yet nothing feels right either. Regret starts forming here, but not in the way people expect. It isn't always regret about ending the relationship itself, but regret about how he showed up. what he failed to notice, and how easily he assumed her love would always be available. He replays moments where he dismissed her emotions, delayed effort, or stayed emotionally distant. These thoughts often surface late at night or during moments of stillness, when distractions no longer work. He may try to suppress them, but the mind insists on resolution. This stage also brings a subtle shift in self-perception. He begins to question his emotional patterns, even if he doesn't openly admit it. He wonders why intimacy feels harder now, why connection feels temporary, and why he feels more alone than he expected. Her love once softened parts of him he didn't know were rigid. Without it, those edges feel exposed. This can create inner tension because acknowledging her impact means acknowledging loss, and loss threatens pride. Silence becomes heavier during this phase. Not reaching out is no longer just about control, it's about fear. Fear that he waited too long, fear that she is healed, fear that his absence taught her how to live without him. The longer he stays quiet, the more permanent the loss feels. Yet reaching out would require vulnerability and accountability, two things he may not yet be ready to face. What makes this reaction so powerful is that it unfolds internally. From the outside, he may still look fine, stable, even confident. But internally, the emotional imbalance grows. He feels disconnected from the version of himself that was most grounded, and slowly understands that her love wasn't something he simply had, but something that shaped him while it was there. The third reaction often arrives later, when the emotional noise finally settles and clarity begins to surface. This is the stage where understanding replaces confusion and truth replaces defense. By now, the absence is no longer shocking, it is familiar, and that familiarity forces reflection. He starts seeing the relationship without the filters of ego or fear. Moments that once felt ordinary now reveal their weight. Her consistency, her patience, the way she stayed even when it cost her peace slowly come into focus. What he once saw as guaranteed, he now recognizes as rare. This realization carries a quiet ache. It's not loud or dramatic, but persistent. He understands that her love was not based on convenience or excitement, but on intention. She chose him repeatedly, even when he gave her reasons not to. That awareness brings a heavy sense of responsibility. He sees how her love asked for growth, not perfection, and how he often met that invitation with avoidance or delay. This is the point where excuses lose their power. Blaming timing, circumstances, or misunderstandings no longer feels honest. At this stage, he also becomes aware of how deeply her absence has changed him. His emotional world feels less grounded, less safe. He may still succeed outwardly, stay busy, or even appear fulfilled, but internally something feels misaligned. The emotional security she provided is gone, and replacing it proves far more difficult than expected. He begins to understand that love like hers wasn't just supportive, it anchored him. Without that anchor, he feels more reactive, more restless, and less certain of himself. Acceptance begins forming here, though it is uncomfortable. He accepts that she may not come back, that her healing might have required distance, and that her silence may be permanent. This acceptance is painful because it removes hope as a distraction, yet it is also the most honest stage. He stops waiting for a moment to fix things and starts sitting with the reality of his choices. In doing so, he learns something important about himself, whether he wants to or not. This phase often leads to a desire for emotional growth, not always to win her back, but to understand why he lost something so meaningful. He starts noticing his patterns more clearly, especially his fear of vulnerability and his tendency to take emotional safety for granted. Her absence becomes a mirror, reflecting parts of himself he had ignored. The lesson is not gentle, but it is lasting. What makes this stage significant is that it reshapes how he loves going forward. He may never say it out loud, but he carries her influence into future connections. Her love becomes the standard he measures himself against, not because he wants to live in the past, but because it taught him what genuine care looks like. Even if their paths never cross again, the imprint of her love remains, shaping his emotional awareness long after she has moved on. The fourth reaction unfolds when memory turns inward and the weight of loss transforms into self-awareness. This is the stage where regret becomes deeply personal rather than situational. He no longer focuses on what happened between them, but on who he was within the relationship. The moments he dismissed, the company, conversations he avoided, and the times he chose comfort over effort begin to resurface with clarity. These memories don't attack him all at once, they arrive quietly, often in ordinary moments, making them harder to ignore. He starts recognizing the emotional labor she carried without complaint. Things he once saw as natural or expected now reveal themselves as acts of love. Her understanding, her emotional availability, and her willingness to stay present even when he pulled away take on new meaning. This realization can be unsettling because it highlights how much he benefited from her emotional strength while offering little in return. The imbalance becomes impossible to deny, and with that comes a heavy sense of accountability. At this point, his identity may feel shaken. He questions the image he held of himself as a good partner, or even a good man. Losing someone who truly loved him challenges the narrative he relied on to protect his ego. It forces him to confront the gap between intention and behavior. He may have believed he cared deeply, but now he sees that care without action created distance instead of security. This awareness is uncomfortable, yet it marks a turning point. Loneliness at this stage feels different. It's no longer just missing her presence, it's missing the version of himself that existed when she was there. He realizes that her love brought out patience, softness, and emotional depth that he has since lost touch with. Without her influence, he feels less emotionally regulated, more guarded, and less open. This absence makes him understand that love isn't just about companionship, but about how it shapes who you become. Regret now shifts into reflection. He begins to see how fear guided many of his choices: fear of vulnerability, fear of responsibility, and fear of being fully seen. Her love required honesty and emotional presence, and instead of rising to meet it, he often retreated. This isn't something he can easily undo, and that realization lingers. He understands that timing matters in love, and that being emotionally unprepared can cost you something irreplaceable. This stage doesn't always lead to reconciliation or closure, but it does lead to growth. The pain he feels becomes a teacher, pushing him toward emotional maturity whether he wants it or not. He carries the awareness forward not as punishment, but as a quiet promise to himself to show up differently in the future. The loss stops being just about her and becomes about who he chooses to become after her absence reshaped him. The fifth reaction appears when acceptance slowly replaces resistance and the reality of permanence settles in. This is the stage where he understands that the loss is not temporary and that she may never return in the way she once existed in his life. Hope, which earlier showed up as fantasy or delayed expectation, begins to fade. This doesn't happen dramatically. It happens through small realizations, such as noticing he no longer reaches for his phone to check if she has called, or understanding that her absence has become part of his daily rhythm. The mind stops negotiating with the past and starts acknowledging the present. With this acceptance comes a deeper emotional clarity. He recognizes that love is not guaranteed by intention alone, and that emotional neglect has consequences. The comfort of assuming she will always understand, always wait, or always forgive dissolves. He sees that her leaving was not impulsive but the result of accumulated moments where her needs were unmet. This understanding reframes the story in his mind. Instead of seeing himself as someone who was abandoned, he begins to see how he participated in the ending through inaction or emotional distance. At this stage, nostalgia becomes less painful and more reflective. Memories no longer stab as sharply. Instead, they feel heavy and meaningful. He can think about her without immediate panic, but there is a quiet sadness attached to the awareness that those moments are finished. He understands that love, once broken by repeated disappointment, rarely returns in the same form. This realization deepens his respect for what they had and for what was lost through neglect rather than conflict. He also begins to notice patterns in himself, the way he avoided difficult conversations, minimized emotional needs, or relied on silence instead of vulnerability becomes clearer. Losing a woman who truly loved him forces him to confront these habits without distraction. There is no one left to soften the consequences or translate his emotions for him. This self-observation can feel isolating, but it also opens the door to self-responsibility. He starts understanding that emotional growth is not something that happens automatically with age, but something that requires conscious effort. There is often a subtle shift in how he views future relationships. Instead of focusing solely on attraction or convenience, he begins to value emotional safety, communication, and consistency. The loss becomes a reference point, reminding him that genuine love requires presence, not just feeling. He realizes that being chosen once does not guarantee being chosen forever, and that love must be actively protected through attention and respect. This phase carries a quiet maturity. The drama fades, the blame dissolves, and what remains is a sober understanding of love's fragility. He may still feel sadness, but it is no longer chaotic. It is steady and reflective, shaping his perspective rather than consuming it. The woman he lost becomes a silent standard in his mind, not to idealize her, but to remember what happens when real love is not fully met. The sixth reaction unfolds when the loss stops being something he reacts to and becomes something that reshapes him. This is not about pain anymore, and not even about regret in its sharp form. It is about internal change that happens quietly, often without him announcing it to anyone. The experience settles into his identity, influencing how he thinks, chooses, and connects. He carries the absence with him not as a wound, but as a lesson that altered his emotional awareness. The woman who truly loved him becomes a reference point that subtly guides his future behavior. At this stage, he understands that some losses are irreversible, not because reconciliation is impossible, but because the version of love that once existed cannot be recreated. He realizes that timing, emotional readiness, and effort matter just as much as feelings. This awareness humbles him. He no longer believes that love survives on intention alone. He recognizes that consistency, emotional availability, and presence are what keep love alive, and that failing to offer them has lasting consequences. This realization often leads to a deeper sense of emotional responsibility. He becomes more conscious of his impact on others, especially in intimate connections. Small behaviors he once dismissed now carry weight in his mind. Silence feels louder. Avoidance feels more damaging. He understands that emotional neglect can hurt just as deeply as betrayal. This doesn't necessarily make him perfect, but it makes him more aware. He starts pausing before withdrawing, thinking before dismissing, and noticing emotions instead of escaping them. There is also a shift in how he experiences attraction. Superficial excitement loses some of its power, while emotional depth becomes more compelling. He's drawn to women who communicate clearly, who expect consistency, and who value emotional honesty. The memory of losing someone who truly loved him makes him less tolerant of shallow connections. He understands that intimacy requires effort and vulnerability, and that real connection demands courage. At times, guilt may still surface, but it is no longer paralyzing. Instead, it acts as a moral compass. It reminds him of who he doesn't want to be again. He may never verbalize this transformation, but it shows in his actions. He listens more. He stays present longer. He learns to express emotions instead of suppressing them. The loss becomes a silent teacher, shaping him in ways comfort never could. This stage is marked by quiet respect for what was lost. He doesn't romanticize the pain, but he honors the truth of it. He understands that the woman he lost did not leave to punish him, but to protect herself. That understanding deepens his emotional maturity. Love to him now is not about possession or reassurance, but about care, effort, and mutual presence. The absence no longer defines him, but the growth it triggered becomes part of who he is. The journey of losing a woman who truly loved him is not marked by drama or sudden heartbreak, but by a slow, unfolding awareness that reshapes a man from the inside out. From initial numbness to delayed recognition, from regret to reflection, and finally to quiet transformation, every stage teaches a lesson about love, presence, and responsibility. He learns that true love is not something to take for granted, that absence speaks louder than words, and that emotional depth cannot be replaced by convenience or distraction. By the end, what remains is not just the memory of loss, but a profound understanding of what it means to love, to be present, and to honor the hearts of those who give themselves fully. In losing her, he gains the insight, emotional maturity, and self-awareness that can guide every connection he forms thereafter, proving that even absence can leave a lasting imprint of growth and wisdom.